In 1966, the U.S. Army administered a standardized psychological evaluation to 4,200 recruits at Fort Ord, California. One recruit, designated Subject 447 in the declassified documents, produced test results that violated every statistical model the Army psychologists had constructed. His answers weren't random. They were inversely correlated with survival probability in a way that shouldn't have been mathematically possible. Subject 447 was Private Daniel Kovach, age 19, from Scranton, Pennsylvania, high school athlete. No prior psychiatric history. His father served in Korea. Daniel enlisted voluntarily in March 1966, passed the physical with above-average scores, and demonstrated textbook emotional stability during intake interviews. Nothing in his background file suggested anomalous cognitive patterns. The psychological battery consisted of 340 questions designed to predict combat performance and identify candidates at risk for stress-induced breakdown. Standard procedure. The test had been refined over 2 decades using data from World War II and Korea. It worked. It consistently identified outliers. Daniel's responses didn't just fail to fit the model. They created a new category. Dr. Raymond Hassler, the supervising psychologist, documented his concerns in a memo dated April 12, 1966. Daniel had answered every question designed to measure fear response with what Hassler termed inverted logic. When asked if he feared personal termination, Daniel selected strongly disagree. When asked if he would hesitate before entering a combat zone, he selected never. These responses alone weren't alarming. Bravado was common among young recruits. What disturbed Hassler was the pattern underneath. Daniel's answers to disguised variations of the same questions remained perfectly consistent, suggesting genuine belief rather than performance. More troubling, his responses to hypothetical moral scenarios indicated what Hassler called an absence of self-preservation architecture. Daniel consistently chose options that maximized mission success while accepting certainty of personal casualty. Hassler recommended a follow-up clinical interview. It never happened. Daniel shipped to advanced infantry training at Fort Benning 3 days later. The paperwork got filed. Protocol was followed. In June 1966, Daniel arrived in Vietnam, assigned to the 1st Cavalry Division. His unit conducted search and patrol operations in the Central Highlands. The terrain was triple canopy jungle, limited visibility, high humidity. Standard tour of duty was 12 months. Daniel lasted 11 weeks. On August 19, 1966, Daniel's platoon engaged an enemy force near landing zone X-ray. Combat lasted 4 hours. According to the after-action report, Daniel's fire team takes a defensive position behind a collapsed bunker. Radio communications indicate the position is being overrun. Daniel volunteers to draw fire while his team repositions. He moves into the open carrying an M60 machine gun. The official report states Daniel provides suppressive fire for approximately 90 seconds before sustaining multiple high-velocity impact injuries. He is removed from the equation on site. The Army awarded him the Silver Star posthumously. His family received the medal in October 1966. Standard protocol. Dr. Hassler learned of Daniel's removal from operational status in November when updating research files. He cross-referenced Daniel's psychological profile with combat outcome data and discovered something that violated probability. Of the 4,200 recruits tested in that March 1966 cohort, 83 were removed from the equation in Vietnam within the first year. Daniel was one of them. That alone wasn't anomalous. What was anomalous was this. Hassler had flagged 6 recruits whose test results showed the same inverted fear response pattern as Daniel. All 6 deployed to Vietnam. All 6 were removed from the equation within 6 months. All 6 were eliminated during voluntary actions that directly contradicted self-preservation instinct. The statistical probability of this clustering was approximately 0.004%. Hassler submitted his findings to Army Medical Command in December 1966, recommending immediate review of psychological screening protocols. He argued the test wasn't just predicting combat stress vulnerability, it was identifying something else, a cognitive pattern that functioned as a termination signature. The Army's response came in January 1967. Hassler's research was classified. His access to recruit psychological data was terminated. The testing protocol remained unchanged. No official explanation was provided. Hassler appealed the decision through academic channels. In March 1967, he published a paper in the Journal of Military Psychology titled Inverse Correlation Patterns in Pre-Deployment Psychological Assessment. The paper discussed his findings without naming Daniel or the other 5 recruits. It focused purely on the statistical anomaly, the pattern that shouldn't exist. The paper was retracted 6 weeks after publication. The journal's editorial board cited methodological concerns. Hassler's university declined to renew his research contract the following year. He transitioned to private practice and never published on military psychology again. The documents related to Subject 447 and the other 5 flagged recruits remained classified until 2006, when portions were released under Freedom of Information Act requests. The files confirm Hassler's core findings, but offer no explanation for why the Army suppressed the research. Here's what we know for certain. Daniel Kovach's psychological evaluation in March 1966 identified a measurable cognitive pattern. That pattern correlated with voluntary termination in combat with statistical significance that exceeded random chance. 5 other recruits displayed the same pattern. All 6 were removed from the equation the same way. Here's what the declassified documents don't explain: whether the test predicted behavior or something else, whether the pattern represented extreme courage or a neurological anomaly that eliminated self-preservation response, whether other recruits with this signature were simply never flagged because Hassler's research was shut down. The Army's current psychological screening process is different from the 1966 protocol. The modifications were implemented in 1968. The official record states the changes were routine updates based on evolving best practices. The record doesn't mention Hassler's research or the 6 recruits whose files were sealed. Daniel Kovach's name is engraved on Panel 9E, line 126 of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington. His Silver Star citation describes his actions on August 19, 1966, as extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming enemy fire. The citation doesn't mention that a psychological test predicted his removal from operational status 5 months earlier. It doesn't mention that the prediction was 100% accurate. The test that identified Daniel and the 5 others was never used again. The specific questions that produced the inverted correlation pattern were removed from the assessment battery in 1968. No official documentation explains why. The Army's position, when asked, is that the modifications reflected advances in psychological science. Dr. Hassler was removed from operational status in 1993. In his unpublished papers, archived at the University of Pennsylvania, there's a handwritten note dated 1987. It reads, "The test didn't predict courage. It identified an absence. What we measured wasn't bravery. It was a cognitive blindness to personal future. They couldn't see themselves surviving. Not fear, not sacrifice. They were already gone." That note was never peer-reviewed. It represents Hassler's personal hypothesis, formed 2 decades after the fact. It has no scientific standing, but it's the only explanation ever offered for why 6 young men, selected by the same psychological anomaly, all volunteered for actions that eliminated them with mathematical precision. The Army has never commented on Hassler's hypothesis. The current psychological screening process remains classified in its specific implementation. Recruits are still evaluated for combat readiness. The tests are still designed to predict performance under stress. Whether they still occasionally identify subject 447s, and what happens when they do, is not part of the public record.